Hello, I'm Kevork Almassian, and you are watching Syrian Analysis. In the last couple of weeks, I did several interviews with important journalists and freelance reporters on Syrian Analysis. Today, I'm hosting Vanessa Beeley. She's a well-known British independent journalist, but today I'm not going to ask the questions. She's going to ask the questions, and she's going to interrogate me on Syrian Analysis. Vanessa, welcome to Syrian Analysis, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kevork. It's a real honor to be here and to be interrogating you. I mean, the whole purpose of this was a follow-on to a number of my articles covering the role of the Syrian Arab Army during this 7-year conflict, how it is portrayed by Western corporate media in a very, very misleading and deceptive way. The way it is so often described as Assad's army, as some kind of sectarian entity headed up by, as it's described, this is not my language, Shia or Alawite command. So I think today what I'd really like to do is spend the time with you and actually unravel all of the myths that surround the Syrian Arab Army throughout this 7-year conflict, and actually really get an understanding for who is the Syrian Arab Army. So maybe if we start with that, like in your view, who are the Syrian Arab Army?
Vanessa, first of all, I want to mention a couple of things because to put things into proper context, my father served in the Syrian Arab Army, my uncle served in the Syrian Arab Army, my cousin served in the Syrian Arab Army, all of my relatives served in the Syrian Arab Army, and we are not from the Shia or the Alawite sect. Actually, this the sectarian politics that some people or some journals and pundits try to promote on social media or traditional media is in order to paint a one color on the Syrian Arab Army, trying to portray it as if it is a one group controlling the Syrian army in order to oppress the majority of the Sunnis. Of course, this is not only a misconception, but also pure propaganda in order to demonize the Syrian Arab Army and their duty to legal duty according to the constitution and according to international law, even in accordance to the Geneva Conventions, that the Syrian Arab Army has the legal right to defend the sovereignty of Syria from armed insurgency, whether the holders of these arms are Syrians or not. We have to, Vanessa, we have to mention to our audience, we have to be very honest that, for example, after the independence of Syria from the French colonization, the French colony, there was the first attempt to create the Syrian Arab Army as a national army for all Syrians. At that time, at the beginning of the foundation of the Syrian Arab Army, this institution, they offered a lot of social, educational, and a lot of help and services to the people who want to join the Syrian army in order to encourage people to join the army. At that time, for example, there were free education, free healthcare. This is before the Baas came into power. And at that time, historically speaking, after the Ottoman Empire and during the French colonization of Syria, the money of Syria, the economy of Syria, the bourgeoisie were mostly in the hands of the Sunnis. Okay, and at that time, for example, when the Syrian Arab Army started to build its foundations, and a lot of people volunteered in the army, of course, the rich of the rich, they're not going to serve the army at that time, and because it was not a compulsory service as it is now. So since then, historically speaking, some of the minorities in Syria, who were mostly poor people in Syria, they joined the army. I'm talking about in the 40s, in the 50s, and even before the Baas came into power. So in the last 6 to 7 decades, if there are more from the minorities in the senior positions. This is the historical context of it. Not because there is a political party that is preferring or appointing, let's say, some generals from certain sects into certain positions, but because there were more interest from certain communities in Syria to join the army. On the other side, there were other communities who preferred to stay in their business, to control the economy, others involved in the education, others in social affairs. But in the army, this was the context why in certain higher positions they are more, for example, from the Alawites or from the Christians. But in Syria, even if they are Alawites or Christians or Druze, this sectarian narrative, we don't talk often in Syria about these differences among the sects. This is not, we don't see Syria from an Orientalist eye. This is very important because, unfortunately, a lot of Western journalists and experts, they have this perception to Syria that we have to divide this society into sects, minorities, majorities. I don't know. I've been living in Syria in my entire life. I was born and raised there. And the first time I heard about the Alawites and the Christians and the Sunnis was in 2011. And this is not a joke.
Yeah,
I went to the first library. I want to read what's the difference between Shiites and Sunnis and Alawites. We have no idea about it because our entire life we lived together. And if there was an Alawi or Sunni official in certain position, he was serving as a Syrian because the macro identity comes first and then the micro identity comes. This is how Syria was ruled. And when the people, those who revolted against the government and hold up arms, they promoted this narrative as well, and they always speak about this sectarian thing that we want the majority should rule Syria and etc. And this is exactly why a lot of people, including from the majority of the Sunnis, they oppose this sectarian criminals because they want to change the nature of Syria, which is more than 20 different communities living together, and they don't want that one certain group to have the rule over Syria.
And I think what is interesting, I mean, I was following the operation in Aleppo recently, both with the Anna News documentary report that came out covering the whole of the campaign to liberate East Aleppo from the extremist and terrorist factions, but also a book, Operation Aleppo, by Tim Ripley, which goes into a lot of detail about particularly the Russian campaign since Russia came into Syria in September 2015. And what I found particularly extraordinary was actually a lot of the ground battles were fought by Liwa al-Quds, by the Palestinian brigade. Yes. So again, you know, this kind of contradicts the sectarian narrative, or even the narrative that the Palestinians are being subjugated to some kind of sectarian extremism by the army or by the Syrian government. And my understanding from being inside Syria, speaking to all of the families who have lost martyrs in the Syrian Arab Army, is that they are all from all different. I remember going to Tishreen Military Hospital, for example, and seeing 6 or 7 young men terribly injured, all from different areas around around Syria, all equally coming from different sects, from different areas, but all fighting together, all showing that comradeship and that sense of unity that you see throughout Syria from these forces, despite the fact that often you see them in situations where they are relatively poorly equipped compared to the extremist and militant groups, for example. What, in your view, keeps this unity? What gives them this core strength?
Vanessa, what you said is very important. I want to build on what you said. I want to mention several examples of ISIS terrorists when they captured Syrian army soldiers and on a fire gunpoint. They want to execute the soldier, and they ask them about their sect. And the soldiers, for example, there were 5 soldiers, 4 of them, they were Sunnis. And these ISIS terrorists, they were mind blown because they think when they came to Syria that this is a sectarian war and that they have to come and they join this terrorist organization in order to support the majority of the Sunnis, quote unquote, you know. So they were shocked. These terrorists, so they called them Khawarij. That means that they went out of the rules of Islam. This is what they considered them, and they executed them again. But what strikes me is not this ISIS, because these people are seedless brains, and they are just criminals. What's more dangerous is those so-called experts on Syria, those so-called pundits, who keep repeating and repeating and repeating these lies, just like the Nazi era. And they are even believing the lies that they are promoting, trying to indoctrinate the people that what's going on in Syria is a sectarian war. Unfortunately, these people have the platforms, they have the money, they have a very strong presence on traditional and social media, and they are just playing with the fate and the future of Syrians and Syria as a nation as a whole. On the other hand, when Syrians see that all these nations, they are fighting against them because of what they are, because of the pattern of life they enjoy in Syria, because of the strong economy that they used to have, because of the tourism, because of many things happened in Syria before the war, starting from education, starting from the economic growth in Syria, from security. Of course, there are some people who were misled and they thought that, okay, we want to join this revolution and regressive revolution against the government, and etc. They bought the propaganda because it was very huge. But after they lived with these militants, they experienced the life under these militants, and they came into conclusion, if you put now the government of Assad and you put any of the alternatives underground in Syria, they will choose Assad without even thinking about it. Only maybe very small minority of people who are in all cases, they are fanatics and they are enjoying the slaughtering, the stoning women, forcing them to wear burqa and all this stuff. But the strength of the Syrian people, this is very important for your audience and my audience to know, is not from the minorities, but from the majority of the Sunnis in Aleppo and in Damascus, who didn't revolt against the government, and they said that we want to keep the pattern of life in Syria where all communities should have the right to choose the way of life they want to live. We don't want to force. We are Sunnis, we also have our way of life. We are not like ISIS and al-Nusra. We are living a very modern life in Syria, and this pattern of life that you are giving us, these rebels in Syria, the so-called rebels, it doesn't suit Syria. So Syrians are not only thinking geopolitical struggle in Syria. At the end, this is their country, this is their society, and they're thinking about the future of their lives and the future of their children, the upcoming generation. What kind of life do we want for Syria? We want this coexistence that we used to have in Syria and still in the government held areas, or the barbaric way of life like in Idlib now. You know, if you do any referendum or elections, I am for free elections monitored by the UN, by any side you want in the world. They should come and monitor any kind of elections in Syria, just so that after the elections, no one would dare to say that it is fabricated or there were any kind of corruption. But they will be mind blown if they come and see in Syria that the majority, if they are, let's say, 60%, 70% support the government, the rest prefer the government over the alternatives. And this is how the government will win in any elections in Syria.
And I think, you know, what was extraordinary for me was being at the liberation of East Aleppo, and then I'm just going to put my headset. And then being in the liberation of Eastern Ghouta was to see the level of respect that was given to all civilians who were leaving by the Syrian Arab Army on the ground. Not only respect, but care, protection. You know, I saw in East Aleppo the Syrian army helping people to carry their belongings down from their homes to take them to the registration centers, etc. And the same in Eastern Ghouta. Nothing but respect. And, you know, when you see and hear this hyperbole in the West about, you know, what was happening in East Aleppo, and I was on the ground in East Aleppo at the time, you know, when these claims were coming in, these grotesque claims that the Syrian Arab Army was committing atrocities against the people they had just given their lives to liberate. And I think that this is a very important point that people need to understand, and you've explained that the Syrian Arab Army and the Syrian people are one. I mean, as so many of the martyrs' families described to me, they're one hand. Those families know that they owe their lives and their safety to the army.
Vanessa, I posted several videos from Eastern Ghouta, for example. Soldiers, they are meeting their family, their mothers and sisters after 5, 6, 7 years of occupation of Eastern Ghouta. No soldier will shoot on his own family at any circumstances, because at the beginning, this is important thing, Vanessa, to mention. At the beginning in 2011, Al Jazeera started this propaganda by saying that, for example, there were deaths among the Syrian army soldiers, and they were saying this is the security forces shooting on the Syrian army soldiers because they are disobeying the orders of the security forces. Because at that time, they don't want to uncover or say that there are militants among the protesters. So they were saying, no, this is the Shabihas or the security forces executing the soldiers because they are disobeying to shoot the protesters. But we all know that since day one, no soldier will shoot on his own people, because these are your people. How can you shoot them? At any circumstances, you can't shoot these people because the army is from the people. All men in Syria serve in the Syrian army, and no man would kill his mother, no man would kill his sister, and no man would kill another person's mother because he has a mother and he knows what's the meaning of mother in Syria. Now, some people think this is emotional argument, but in Syria, we do these calculations. The people of Syria are they are very they like the society, they like the family relationships, they respect these family relationships, motherhood, brotherhood, and all this stuff. This is something very important for us. So you can't expect from any soldier to kill a civilian. My father was in the army in the 80s, and in the 80s, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood, they did an armed insurgency against the Syrian army. My father was in the airport of Aleppo, and he tells me how the Muslim Brotherhood attacked on the airport. They executed the soldiers and etc. And at that time, when the Syrian army was defending itself again, it was the same narrative that Assad at that time, Hafez Assad, sent his tanks from town to town just to kill people. These were not ordinary people. This was a terrorist organization. It was a Muslim Brotherhood, and they are no different from Al-Nusra Front of 2018. They are the same ideology. I don't understand why shouldn't we defend ourselves from these terrorist organizations while the Western government have all the right to send their planes thousands of miles away from their nations to kill these terrorists, while we are not allowed to kill them in our own nation.
Yeah, you've raised actually two really important points there, Kevork, at two ends of the spectrum. First of all, in the early days of the so-called insurgents, there were rumors, again, propaganda, that a number of those who were uprising were Syrian Arab Army who had defected to the side of the so-called revolutionaries. But then also going forward to, as I said, the other end of the spectrum, I think it's important for people in the West to understand how it feels for you as a Syrian, for example, when the United States coalition is basically targeting your armed forces that are defending your people inside Syria. I mean, I'm thinking particularly of Deir ez-Zor in 2016, but even more recently in Al Bukamal in the last couple of days, for example.
Actually, Vanessa, what's happening now in eastern Syria is very dangerous because there were negotiations between Russia and the United States for Tanaf and Daraa and eastern Syria. And obviously, now we are the 21st of June. So maybe then comes another agreement, so that those who are watching, we are in the 21st of June. There is no agreement with the United States, and the Syrian army now is opening fire on the Islamist terrorist groups in Daraa to recapture this area. It seems that the Americans are not going to leave at Tanaf area. But what the Syrians feel in when the Americans target the Syrian army, when the Americans targeted the French and the British, they bombed Syria after the alleged chemical attack in Douma, and before that in Shairat airbase, and before the many times, maybe the Americans bombed the Syrian army more than they bombed al-Nusra Front in Syria. I don't think they even bombed al-Nusra Front in Syria before. But what the Syrians do after every bombing, that they gather around their army more and more, and the Americans, by doing this, after this bombing of the trilateral bombing of Syria, I said the Americans did such a stupid thing. If there was anyone who has doubts that the that the Syrian army is protecting Syria, now they will be convinced. If there was anyone who was in the middle, now they will support the Syrian army. If there was anyone who thought that the Syrian army could be crumbled by after several strikes by the Americans, now they know that it's not gonna crumble. So what they did is a major. They boosted the Syrian army. It was a very stupid policy what they have done in Syria. In all cases, if you ask anyone who is with the Syrian government, they tell you two things why they support the Syrian government. One, because Syria and the government is against the hegemony of the Americans and the Israelis in the region. And two, because we want an harmonic society where all people coexist together, and we don't want one group to dominate over other groups. This is the strength of the Syrian army, and this is why the majority of the people support the Syrian government. I don't think there are people who support the Baas party, quote unquote. I don't think that the people support the party, they support the army. And I'm sure President Assad knows, and this war is the biggest proof for that his major strength is his people, and the people who are fighting in the army, which is also his people. And it's not the political parties that their role is very minor comparing to what the sacrifices of the army and those who are fighting in the affiliated forces.
Absolutely. And I would say that that's very much the impression I have, is that everyone is fighting for Syria. It's not a politicized battle. It's a fighting for your society, for your secular state, for your way of life, and in resistance against, as you said, this hegemony from all sides to a degree, because you also have Turkey in the northwest, you have the United States coalition, and you have Israel. So yeah, I mean, that bears out exactly what I've seen and heard from the Syrian people on the ground in different areas. Another one of the sort of propaganda tropes is that there are so many foreign fighters fighting alongside the Syrian Arab Army. They will mention Afghanis, they will mention obviously Iran, they will mention Hezbollah, they will mention Russia. I've read a number of articles which has tried to break down the percentage of foreign fighters, and I think it's, you know, it's quite hard to do. But I mean, I think that's another important one to put into context for people.
Vanessa, we don't have clear statistics, but the reports on the ground indicate that the number of the Syrian army is over 120,000 active fighters on the ground. We're talking about the Syrian army. The Hezbollah fighters won't exceed more than 15 to 20,000 fighters in all over Syria. The Iranian forces are less than 2,000 advisors and generals. The Iranian presence in Syria is not a fighting mission. They are mostly advising and guiding the forces on the ground. We have the Iraqis. They are very few comparing to the Hezbollah forces, and all these forces came by the invitation of the Syrian government.
Yeah.
We have to focus on this thing because those who like it or not, whether they're watching us or not, the Syrian government is the legitimate government of Syria, whether you like it or not. It's the recognized government in the UN, and its flag is over all the embassies around the world. When the rebels, if the rebels overthrow the government and they took power, then they have the right to invite. We are talking international law. If we want to say, throw words in the air, we can say anything we want. But the Syrian government has the right to invite its allies to Syria, and there are agreements with these allies. But why these forces came to Syria? This is, we don't speak about the reasons, we always speak about the consequences. At the end of 2011, when there was the so-called Free Syrian Army, sorry, they created a battalion called Al-Muhajirin, the battalion of Muhajirin, meaning those who are the migrants who are coming to Syria. That means the non-Syrians. So at the end of 2011, there was already a foreign armed group in the ranks of the Free Syrian Army, and this was the root of the Al-Nusra Front later on, which developed to Nusra and then developed to ISIS and etc. But in the middle of 2012, we already had thousands of foreign jihadists in Syria, and the Syrian government has been fought by politically from more than 110 or 20 countries around the world, and militarily at least 60 to 80 nationalities were fighting in Syria. So any army in the world will ask its allies to come and help. If more than 80 nationalities fighting in France or in Germany, the entire EU governments will send forces to help. When one gunman in Munich 2 years ago, or 1.5 years ago, in Munich, one gunman has forced the German government to call reinforcement from Austria. One gunman.
Yeah.
Imagine that we have tens of thousands of foreign jihadists in Syria, and there is someone who dares to ask you why your allies are fighting with you. I mean, are you kidding me? If Syria falls, that means these fighters will go to Iran, they will go to Central Asia, and they will threaten the national security of Iran, of Russia, and all the nations in the region. I don't understand how people think if Syria falls in the hands of these terrorists, that means Europe itself has borders with the terrorists, because Turkey is always open borders to Europe. That means you have borders with the terrorist organizations in Syria. They are shooting on their own feet, the European governments. The Americans don't care because they are far away from Europe, and the terrorists are not going to reach there. But their bases are secured in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the godfathers of ISIS and Al-Nusra. So I don't understand why the European governments are still following the the paths of the Americans. They should have their own interests in Syria. The French have sent occupation forces to Syria. The Italians sent occupation forces to Syria. What are they doing? What interest do they have in Syria?
Absolutely.
This is it's mind-blowing. Like I'm in Germany now, and if you tell to someone that you are with the Syrian government, they will be, are you kidding me? It's like if you are supporting something, I don't know, an animal or something, a very wild animal. They get crazy. They don't know, because they have no idea what's going on in Syria. They think these brave revolutionaries fighting against Assad, and then you have these brave Kurdish revolutionaries fighting for their independence. It's crazy how the people are brainwashed in 2018. Why am I not brainwashed about France and Germany and Great Britain? Why I'm able to search in the internet and they are not able to search in the internet about our country? At the end, as a Syrian, we don't have the power to influence on anything in Europe. So whether I'm awake or not, it doesn't matter. But if they are not awake in Europe and they are voting for criminals, that means their governments, they will kill us. And then we will come as refugees to Europe, and then they complain for the second time why the refugees are coming. Please deal with the root of the issue. Stop the war, hands off Syria, then no refugees will come to Europe. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, I mean, you just made me think of when I was in Eastern Ghouta, and one of the officials in Samalka, I think it was, told me that there were 280 British passport holders who had left with Nusra Front on the buses to Idlib. So, I completely agree with you. I think the media has done this incredible job of sort of gaslighting everyone in the West as regards the situation in Syria, and not giving them any context to the conflict. So there's no empathy, there's no understanding, which is the typical role of war propaganda, is to dehumanize and to remove empathy. Because I think we've been talking for half an hour now, and I could go on for hours. One thing that I really wanted to ask you, because it's a question that's kind of been on my mind. We heard very recently about, I think it's the 70 tribes from Hasakah, Raqqa, and Aleppo who've taken a stand against the US occupation, both directly and via its proxy SDF forces that we suspect have been power multiplied by a number of other factions, extremist factions included, in the Northeast. How big an impact is this? Is this possible that it will change America's power base in the Northeast? Is it a strong enough stance that it can do that?
Vanessa, this is only the beginning. I predicted this some time ago, because Syria has a history in organizing such resistance organizations, whether in Lebanon and whether in Iraq. In Iraq, after the occupation of Iraq in 2003, when Colin Powell came to Syria and he told Bashar al-Assad, you have to abide with these conditions or we are coming for you. That's it. And at that time, the Syrians had no choice but to support the resistance in Iraq, the tribes in Iraq, and they organized this resistance against the Americans, and thousands of American soldiers died. But it was a very vital fight for the Americans there, so they stayed in Iraq until, I believe, 2013 or something. It was their project. But in Syria, the situation is a little bit different, because not everybody supports in the United States the war in Syria. It's a controversial issue for them, and it's an issue that, do we want to sacrifice our forces for the Kurds, and why won't we will do that, for what price? The thing is, at the beginning, I don't think there will be direct confrontation between Syria and the United States. This is something logical and very realistic. The Syrians are not going to fight the US forces directly, but they can organize the tribes, the clans, and the residents in that area, because the majority, the 70% of the people, they don't belong to the SDF or the YPG or the PYD or the Kurdish militias. So the minority will not be able to control that area for a long time. I believe if the Syrian side organize a resistance against the Americans, whether in the terms of snipings, car bombs in the streets, and etc., it's a dirty game. So at the end, you are not able to kick the Americans out of Syria by begging them. At the end, they came by force, and who occupies your land by force will go out by force. This is a very easy equation. And I believe if the Americans lost some of their soldiers, there will be a debate in the United States on the benefit of staying the American forces. And the mentality of Donald Trump is different from Obama and different from his from the ex-presidents. He thinks always by business calculations, pros and cons, what will he gain from that. I don't think Trump will fight for a few barrel oils in Syria and sacrifice tens of soldiers. This is one of my perceptions about that. But secondly, maybe the French and other European countries fill this vacuum if the Americans want to live in that area. So it's very complicated. The time hasn't come for Eastern Syria. This is I'm very clear about this. In the next weeks and in the next days, the fight will be in Daraa. And it is very important fight because they are the proxies of the Israel. And there will be attempt to liberate At-Tanaf. There will be attempts to liberate Idlib. I believe the fight against the proxies of the United States and the Americans themselves will become at the end, because the Syrians always, historically, the Syrian government always play on the factor of time, and they bet that the right circumstances will come when the international environment will change, and maybe the Americans withdraw by themselves without fighting. But if they stayed there in eastern Syria, I believe what Assad said, we will liberate every inch of Syria. This is not a slogan. This is not a cliche. This is a strategy, and they will come after the Americans by any means possible, and to kick out the occupation forces from Syria. And it's true that the Americans, they don't follow international law, but at the end they cannot find an excuse in front of the UN, in front of any other agency, to justify their presence in Syria, because it's illegal.
Thank you. That is a very good explanation of what's happening. I think before we come to an end, I would like maybe for you to put into context the Syrian army for people in the West, like maybe in a sense that they can actually empathize with who the army is. I know we've gone through exactly who they are and so on, but maybe just a final message so that there is a full understanding of the importance to the Syrian Arab Army, in my view, not only for Syria, but actually for all of us.
I will say in only a few words, Vanessa, those who are fighting in the Syrian army are like Kevork, just like me. They're my friends. They're my relatives. They're my cousins. My friends fight in the army. They are very modern people. They are engineers. They are doctors. They are scientists. These people, they were in the university and then they served the army. Some of them served after the school. These people are not fanatics. These people are secular fighters. They are fighting for their family, for their nation, for the security of the country. They are not fighting for an individual. There is no person fights for an individual for 8 years. There is no one fight for an individual for 8 years for $50 per month. On the other hand, the opposition fighters, they are getting $300, $400, $500 per month, because these people are not mercenaries. They have a cause. They are fighting for it. the other day, I saw my friend and classmate and the person we used to play basketball with him in Homentmen, which is a Yarmouk basketball team and football team. It's very known in Aleppo. And this guy, he was live on an Armenian TV from Yerevan. And we all know that the 102 unit has been discharged from the army, and he served the army for 8 years. And I saw him on TV. I cried for him because he lost 8 years from his life fighting for the army, for the security of my family, for the security of other families. This guy sacrificed 8 years from his life, from his health, from his mental health, and from his body health in order to secure the safety and the continuity of the other generations. He was not fighting for Assad and not for any other individual. This is how we see and perceive things in Syria. And this is why the Syrians are going to win. I have no doubts about it. It could take years, but believe me, no one has more patience than the Syrians, and they will come after. They will overcome this crisis, and they will be victorious. Look what's happening in Aleppo. Please, guys, go and check the latest photo I posted on Twitter and how they are reconstructing their city with their bare hands. No money from outside, because the Syrians and the Aleppis in particular, they can take out money from the rock, from the stone. They can make money. So we don't need the money from the IMF, from the World Bank, as the people think we will take $200 billion from them. Syrians are very strong people, and they are educated people, and they will be victorious, period. Deal with it, the enemies of Syria.
Well, I mean, what can I say except that I'm so proud to know the Syrians that I know, really. And it's honestly been an honor to be able to interrogate you about this, Kevork, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Guys, I will put all the links of Vanessa Beeley in the description below, her Twitter, Facebook, and also more importantly, the Patreon. Lately, Vanessa launched her Patreon account so that you guys also can support her financially. Every $1, if you donated $1 for Syriana analysis and for Vanessa Beeley per month, we can do much better job with better equipments, and she can also travel more often to Syria. So this is something that we are trying to do by the crowdfunding, by the people who are funding us. This is why people like Vanessa, they're not afraid to say the truth, because at the end, she's not funded from any organization. And I myself, I'm not funded from any organization. No one can dictate what we should say and what we should do. And believe me, Assad and his regime, they don't have money to pay, guys. So don't believe anyone who says that Assad is paying for this and Assad is paying for that. Okay, nobody pays you any penny in Syria for standing by your nation. So guys, this was everything for today. Thank you very much for watching, and check in the description below for all the details, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much, Vanessa Beeley.